Welcome to Mystere Creations. Today I'm speaking with the London spy, David Harry. We finish our discussion about his tours of London and speak about some hidden gems, so please watch to the end. There is, like the first episode, some show and tell. You can check him out on TikTok at the London Spy or book a tour from his website www.thelondonspy.com. Have you had any ghostly encounters while on tour?
I'm severely agnostic in the sense of I've never seen any evidence of ghosts, but I do enjoy doing ghost tours. And I love the stories that you pick up around the city of London there, but no, I've never seen anything. I mean, I would love to have some kind of paranormal experience. I wouldn't be, you know, I would. It will give me something to believe in terms of potential afterlife or potential you know things beyond the rationality. But also, I'm not like there's a type of quite dismissive approach from logic-based sort of it's called scientism,
Yeah.
which seeks to provide very simplistic answers using quite pat and cod scientific explanations to mysteries of life. And I think it's quite easy to fall into lazy methods of thinking about these difficult questions. So I'm sure the short answer is no, but I would love to, and I'm open to it. However, the sort of ghost stories that I do tell, I do ghost tours of the city of London. The funniest of them all is it's just the name of it. So, and I'm not sure if this applies to like North American or Canadian audiences in the same way, but there's a street in the city of London by this old church called the Church of the Holy Sepulchre, and it was a man who had moved in there with his daughter and his wife. And she then died, and he then started going out with her sister. And at this time, it was illegal to have any type of relationship with your wife's sister, even if your wife was dead. But he then pretended they were married, and then his landlord lent them some money, and he lent his landlord some money, and he refused to pay him back. And then he moved out, and the landlord started blackmailing him. And the landlord's daughter claimed that she could hear these scratching noises in her bedroom, and that the ghostly voices came to her. This is in the 1760s, by the way, and said, "Yeah, it's me. I'm the ghost of your tenant's first wife, and he murdered me. He murdered me. Avenge me." And and then it got caught up with the press, and King George III came along, and the heir to the throne, and Samuel Johnson came up, and it became a huge cause célèbre between the Methodists and the Anglicans. The Methodists were much more credulous and likely to believe these things, and the Anglicans were much less taken in by these things. Anyway, the whole cause became known as, so the ghost was known as Fanny. The name of the street was called Cock Lane, and the whole thing would be called Scratching Fanny of Cock Lane. And in English, Fanny means not like a fanny pack in America. It's all the front side of it. So scratching Fanny means scratching at your genitals in Cock Lane. So that's the story, and it all became exposed. And they found that the little girl was carrying something in her corset that, like, clicking a little bit of wood or bone. So, but it was one of the biggest scandals of the late 18th century. Scratching Fanny of Cock Lane. That's that one. Other ones are just around the corner from there is a site of it's now the Old Bailey, but it used to be the site of the most infamous prison of all London since medieval period, known as Newgate Jail. And again, there were all sorts of ghosts there. By the way, this key you see here is a genuine key from Newgate Jail. And again, I bring it on my tours to show people. I've got like an attribution from it from a collector. The jail was destroyed in 1901, and it became what is now the new massive law courts, the Old Bailey, where so many famous trials have taken place, including Oscar Wilde, the Cray twins, Dr. Crippen, the poisoner, etc. But this is the site of Newgate Jail, and another story goes there that in medieval times there was a necromancer a wizard who was imprisoned there, and there was a famine. And obviously, famines in public means that in prison there's nothing whatsoever. So a lot of the other prisoners gang together, killed this necromancer, and ate him like cannibalism in the jail. But he had put a curse on them, apparently. And so after he was eaten, anyone who'd touched a morsel of his flesh, they heard this scratching noise, scratching again, and the barking and howling outside their door. And then every night, the next morning, they would wake up and one of them was gone. And all they could find was, again, his bones and a few bits of scraps of flesh. And they claimed that it was the black dog of Newgate, that his spirit was being avenged by this ghostly dog, this hound of hell, that was making his way through all the different prisoners who'd supped from his flesh. And that some of them then were so terrified of this that they actually had a prison break. But they were still hunted down outside of prison as well, and followed up. This is in about the 14th century, I think it was, and eventually they all died. But the ghost of the dog still haunts. There's an alleyway called Amen Corner, famous band of that same name from the 60s. Paradise is half as nice, but it was named after this street near the city, near St. Paul's Cathedral, where you would walk past Paternoster Row saying your prayers, and then you'd finish Amen at the end of the street, and that's where it was. And there's a wall of the prison at the other end of it still there. And some people claim that they can still see the ghost of the black dog slinking along it and then dropping down and heading towards you. And it's got a horrific smell as well. That's the other thing. So that's another one of the ghost stories. Oh, so many ghost stories I talk about. But there's the one in St. Bart's Hospital. There's a haunted lift there, allegedly. This is one of the oldest hospitals in London, founded in 1123 by a man called Rahir, who was the court jester of Henry II, I think it is. Anyway, and there's a haunted lift in this building, apparently. And if you get out of it and you walk down the stairs, it follows you down, or it would suddenly stop working and then suddenly go straight down to the basement and let you out there, and then following you up as well. So, yeah, but basically, I've got no belief whatsoever in ghosts, but I love telling stories to people and giving them the heebie-jeebies. And also, because I'm a magician as well, I can create some quite spooky effects that I use to, illustrate it. For example, just outside the prison, Newgate, you've got Bart's Hospital. It's a place called Smithfield, and that's the famous execution ground. Favorite of the Tudors, Henry VIII. Boiled a chef to death there, allegedly, for having attempted to poison one of his master. So a warning to all chefs there: if you want to poison someone, make sure you get away with it. But also, it's where the Braveheart William Wallace, the famous Scottish fighter for freedom, well, Mel Gibson, as we know, was executed. And there's a plaque there with some Gaelic words on it underneath as well. He was incidentally the first person who had his severed head placed on a spike at the end of London Bridge. Many more afterwards suffered that same fate. But it's also where Queen Mary Tudor, Henry VIII's oldest daughter, got her revenge against the Protestants. So many Protestant bishops and priests were executed, mostly through being burnt to death in Smithfield Market as well. And it's alleged that their ghosts still haunt it, and you can smell the roasted flesh from time to time. There's also, it's where there was, in 1381, there was an incredible working class peasants revolt, it's known, against poll tax, which in the 1980s became the downfall of Margaret Thatcher. And it was on Smithfield that it ended. So all the peasants under a man called Wat Tyler confronted the king, and he agreed to terms with them. But suddenly the Lord Mayor of London, who was next to him on a horse, jumped off and stabbed the leader of the peasants' revolt with his blade. He then died on the field, and the crowds dissipated, and the revolt was over. So he was the Lord Mayor of London that year, and he was actually a member of one of the livery companies, the ancient livery guilds. He was a fishmonger. And if you go to Fishmongers Hall nowadays, it's at the north end of London Bridge, upstairs they've got an image of him with a knife blade in his hand, which is meant to be the actual blade that he used to stab the leader of the peasants' revolt to death in 1381. So I digress. But anyway, lots of different ghost stories for you, or horrific murders.
Any city with any history, you'll find that sort of thing. Here, it's more the underground and dealing with the pirate trade and smuggling. The Smuggler's Cove and the undergrounds are very rife with that.
Mm-hmm. You've also got the docks in London as well, in the East End. So many pirates were executed there, and their bodies will be hung out over the water from a gibbet, and they would be left there for 3 tides to wash over them. That's the story before they could be taken down. And sometimes they would just leave them there as a permanent reminder of the fates of piracy.
Can you tell everyone a little bit about uh, Clive Baker's automation machines? Automaton.
Ah, right. Okay. So this guy, he's not Clay Baker though. I'll look up his name in a moment, but he is a inventor, and he became famous in the 80s for very intricate, detailed designs, images of uh, political commentary. Actually, he's very political. Um, he would write, and he designed these. It was like there's a man called Heath Robinson in the 1920s who would create these incredible, detailed, imaginary devices that would be ridiculous. He does this, and he's updated them, and he's an engineer as well. So he is full of and he's got this place in London. His name's Tim Hunkin. That's the guy I think you're thinking about. Tim Hunkin. He's got this place in London, and I discovered it by accident about 6 months ago. Just cycling down a side road, I saw this place. It's called, the Automata Mechanical Theatre, as it were. And he creates that's ridiculous. It's like an arcade. So you spend money when you go in. You buy these tokens that you can use in his missions, and you put them in, and they will then demonstrate something, and you can interact with them as well. But they're so funny. They're really so. One of them, for example, you've got a okay, it's a bit like working in for Amazon or one of those huge factories, and you got to pedal and you got to move this shopping trolley around the screen. It's not like an image; it's like a proper mechanical device. It's not like a video screen. It's a proper mechanical object. You've got to take it around these, and you've got to pedal it right way to get to it, and you've got 20 seconds to get there. And when you arrive, it will drop into the basket, and you've got your quota. And then you have to keep going until you lose it. And it gives you a zero hours contract and says you're out. You're paying. So that's just satire on the hiring habits of these multinational corporations who I won't name. Sorry. Right. Then you've also got you've got these drones that are flying around this mansion, and you've got to hover the drone around the building, looking through the windows. And basically, you're spying on celebrities inside the different windows, and you've got to take photographs of them. So some of them, they're like having an affair with someone else who's famous in the bedroom. Another one, they're snorting up these massive lines of coke. They're on the floor in this room as well. So it's all about this whole paparazzi expose of celebrity scandal as well. Then you've got one about divorce, and you have to spin the wheels to make the couple separate. And you press a boost power to break the house apart as well. But yeah, so he is so inventive, this guy. He keeps putting new models up all the time. He's an electronic engineer by training as well. He was a cartoonist. And these coin operated machines have been around the world. A lot of them are wooden, and another one you've got is this it's called the Dream, and there's a man lying in bed, and suddenly he starts to wake up, and he pulls the sheets up and back, and suddenly this huge snake that's big as him comes through the window, hovers over his face like this, and then he screams, and he goes back again as well, and it's like he's having a nightmare, some Freudian sort of a nightmare image as well. But these are fantastic devices that you can go in and spend a couple of hours, buying his tokens and just using them. He's just so inventive. It's incredibly witty, and he's quite political as well. yeah, I think he's more on the liberal side of politics too, but he really has a unique vision about how to entertain people with these incredible simulating rising amusement arcade machines that work really well. I've actually got his website up here. It's called timhunkin.com. And so you've got this like yeah, pet or meat, that's the other one, whereby you've got you spin the wheel, and then the family either end up with a lamb that's a pet, or the lamb's been turned into their lunch and they're eating it as well. And then you've also got an option where you're on the tube on London Underground, and most people in the London Underground just ignore each other. They never look at anybody. Whereas you've got the choice of either being sociable or anti-social here as well, and different things happen depending on what you choose there too. So he's very, very smart, really witty, very, very inventive, and such a nice guy as well. I went into the shop and he was there. We had a long chat. I did a video about the TikTok about it, and he's invited me to have parties there and stuff like that. So yeah, Tim Hunkin, absolute genius, creative inventor, and really highly recommend hunting down his little automata amusement arcade museum in Holborn.
Okay. I love the ingenuity of automatons. Throughout history, there's been some really intricate ones.
Yeah, and
Um,
some fake ones as well.
yeah.
There's a famous case. It was the chess player. You must have heard about this.
Mhm.
It was the Turkish chess player. I've got a whole book about it in next door. And it was so small that there was no way any human could have fitted inside it. Therefore, they assumed it genuinely was a proper chess playing computer. This is in the 18th century, and I think it's actually it's in the Museum of London. I think they've got one of them, but only in store. I saw it on display a few years ago, but I don't think it's been put back yet since then. And basically, it was like a man smoking a hookah pipe, and you would play chess with it, and it would move the pieces, with its automatic hand, etc. But apparently, it was actually operated by a small person who was at a tight angle inside it, cramped up inside it, etc. But to go back to Roman and Greek times, you had some reports of devices there that could power what's what they did? They would serve drinks, I think, all sorts of things as well. But yes, I find automata quite scary, though. My son hates them. Yeah, when he was a child, he got scared by one. So yeah, all sorts of dummies, that sort of thing. He doesn't like them at all. But they are so inventive. And there was one as well. Oh, no. It was I read about it. It was operating in Leicester Square, and it would speak to you. And it was basically a very thin speaking trumpet that was like about 200 yards away. People would actually speak through it that way. They couldn't see it. So yeah, but they're very deceptive. And I can imagine for being incredibly useful for ghost stories as well and provide haunted. Yeah. Also, that's right. There was in Fleet Street, very close to modern day Royal Courts of Justice, there's a building called Prince Henry's Building, and it had a waxworks in it, and it was a rival to Madame Tussauds, which everyone's heard of. But this was Mrs. Salmon, Salmon's Waxworks, equally famous in its own time to Madame Tussauds, that would have all sorts of wax dolls in them, but a lot of them were articulated and automated, and they would be triggered by stepping on a floorboard or opening a door in those rooms, and they would move and frighten people. So yeah, there's a long history of these sort of things in London, especially.
Um, what's your favorite overlooked or hidden piece of architecture?
Okay, so there's many, but the one I think is the most unusual is it's how can I put it? It's I don't want to use an offensive term here. It's a bipolar building. Let's put it that way. I hope that's the appropriate word to use. So in that it's two buildings for the price of one, three buildings really. It's in the city of London again. It's just off of a street called Moorgate, a very ancient street, and it's the headquarters of the Institute of Chartered Accountants for England and Wales. And when it was first put up in the 1870s, it had an amazing, huge frontage to it, typical mid to late Victorian era, with a frieze along the top, the second floor, detailing Victorian achievements in society, including the benefits of agriculture, finance, investment, sailing, art, factories, whatever. Beautifully laid out frieze. Then around the side, they put another extension to it in the 1930s, which had the same, it continued the frieze, but they were more updated to be slightly a bit more Art Deco style. And, it's still a continuity, but you could see the change in focus of the artistic style. But then in the 1950s, early 60s, they commissioned another extension to it around the back of the building. And it's like two buildings pushed together. You can't believe they're the same building. It's total brutalism. It's just concrete brutalism, which has no connection whatsoever to the rest of the building, other than it's just contiguous. It's connected to it. So it's hardcore, absolutely no concession to aesthetic values whatsoever. It's entirely utilitarian. It's just in your face, hardcore concrete with no finish whatsoever. It's not polished, and it's just a rubble type of rough exterior. There's staircases and windows and doors, but that's this one building. And again, I did put it onto TikTok, and it had a lot of views and comments from it. But as you start to walk around, if you start with the old Victorian one and walk around the corner to it, it just blows my mind to think it's the same building. So that's one of the my favorite. But overlooked, yes, definitely, it's overlooked. The other one I'd say, it's more famous, this one, but it's still an extraordinary thing, is the personal house of a man called John Soane, who, amongst other things, he designed the original 19th century, 18th century Bank of England. Amazing, huge monument, very classical. His own house, however, is in a little square called Lincoln's Inn Fields, just near the legal district of London, in Holborn area again. And he's been preserved exactly as it was in his life. He was an amazing collector as well. So he would travel around the world snapping up objects which would now be considered cultural appropriation, I think. You know, and he would bring them to his house, and he modeled his house throughout. It's got multiple floors and different levels, and the lighting is incredible. He's managed to get natural light in actually every room, even the basement. There's these wells throughout it as all stained glass images, and basically he's filled it with these incredible historical objects and busts and Greek and Egyptian and Roman and all European style models. And he's got a huge sarcophagus, an Egyptian sarcophagus in the middle of the basement. You can see it from the top floor. You just look down the well, and it's just the level of detail throughout it is staggering, and it's unique. It's an experiment in lighting, in interior design, in accessibility, in invention, and it's a pleasure. Every room you go into, you start smiling at just how much he's managed to cram into it, and how his own theories about light and about nature cover everything. It's a unique place, and they do. It's free to visit as well, and obviously the Institute of Chartered Accountants uses this. So this is the interior that you've got. Just staggering joy through every room there as well. So I highly recommend those two places. And if I think of anywhere else while we're talking, I'll think, okay, another one. Right. Again, this is more just like a juxtaposition between the two. So there's a chain of hotels in London. I don't know if they're national or international, called the Leonardo Hotels. And they've got a hotel near the Tower of London, just up from the tube station. And if it's maybe 1970s, very nice hotel. And there's an archway as you walk. The entrance is on one side of the archway, and through the archway you can drive, but there's a little car park at the back, and you can park up there to unload, etc. But at the back of it, on the other side of the hotel, and you can't see it unless you walk through the archway to something, is an 1800-year-old, very large section of the original Roman wall that was built in about the year 200. It's about 100 foot long, maybe. And it's been preserved really well, and it's also very deep. So you're about 2 meters beneath you, at least. You can see where the original level of land that the Romans built on was before soil erosion and land movements and building works leading on top, leveled, raised up the floor space of London's height compared to what it had been back then. Oh, and by the way, I must say that whenever I put anything up on social media about how much lower Roman London was than it is nowadays, there's a very tiresome group of, I don't really want to say conspiracy theorists, but these people who have this idea. Have you come across it? It's called the mud flood.
Yeah.
I don't know why they persist in this ridiculous. They believe that there was some kind of a modern day flood in late 19th century that destroyed this imaginary empire called the Tartarian Empire, who have all sorts of examples of architecture that still live occasionally. And whenever I put videos up about how Roman London was much lower than it is now, they all say, oh, it's the Tartar, it's the mud flood. And there's nothing I can say or do that changes their mind, and they're just obsessed. So that's just as an aside. If anyone is watching me, hello, but I'm afraid I don't really believe it at all. So yeah, this Roman remains. It's just in front of you, and you can close up, look at it. You can actually go under it. There's a gap in one side. You can walk around it and see the other side, the exterior. And it's just amazing to think that this stuff is accessible. It's still there. It's been preserved, and it's right next to this new hotel that just against it. And there's another hotel a bit further down next to it called Citizen M. And again, you can go into their basement. You can walk out to look at the wall in front of you as well. So that's an amazing. That's definitely underlooked as well. Bit of London architecture that I really enjoy and like love taking my guests to and pointing out as well. But there's a lot. Oh, and the other thing is, okay, there's a place called Wood Street in the city of London. By the way, all these street names in the city are due to the original trades that were carried out there before the Great Fire of London. So after the Great Fire struck in 1666, I'm trying to find something to share with you. The plan was to rebuild London anew with a palimpsest removed. You had a chance to sweep away all the old medieval layout and put in place a model London that would have been similar. I've got something to share with you here, I think. Sorry about walking away from the screen. Okay, here we go. Yeah, this is it. A new model London would have been generated. And if you can see this, this is what the plan was for London to be like. And as you can see, it was to replace the old spider's web sort of, no, spider's web, this is more like a spider's web, the higgledy-piggledy organic layout of winding streets, tiny streets, unusual names, with this new layout that would have been much more like what Paris is nowadays, boulevards and rational, logical, geometric straight lines, etc. This was the design that was put forward by Sir Christopher Wren, and it wasn't approved in the end. I'll come back to that a bit later. But Wood Street is an example of one of the old streets. There, at the top end of it, you've got 1, 2, 3, 5 architectural examples that are just incredible next to each other. So in the middle of the street, you've got an old church. I'll come back to that later. At the top end of the street, you've got this enormous example of postmodern architecture. So if you're not familiar with postmodern architecture, it was a revolt against the brutalism, such as at the Institute of Chartered Accountants, post-war brutalism, which is concrete, very utilitarian, ugly. Some people might say there was a beauty to it in many cases, but certainly austere. And postmodern started in the 70s, I think, really for architecture at least. And it was a revolt. So it was polychrome, there were lots of different colors in it. It was often like a toy. So look, it was made of Duplo blocks, that were put together, different colors, different materials, or Lego, some people say as well. So it's like just toy-like. plastic appearance to it, multiple colors, lots of open spaces in it. It's often quite asymmetrical, certainly craggy, and a lot of different experimental forms in it as well that were like. So this is a guy called Terry Farrell who produced. It's called uh, Alban Gate. That's it, and it's he's the same architect, by the way, who did the MI6 building on the south bank of the River Thames. It appears in a lot of the James Bond films. It gets blown up in Skyfall. That's him. So that's the top of the street, and next to it, you've got another classic, not classical. It's an example of one of the two greatest modern architects from Britain, probably apart from Zaha Hadid, um, a guy called Richard Rogers, and it's called number 80, number 100 Wood Street. And Richard Rogers was the guy who did the Pompidou Centre, who did also the Lloyd's building in London. And his idea is it's often called bowelism, where you rip open a building, you pull out its guts, and you put them on the exterior of the building. He changed his ideas about that in later life because it became very difficult to maintain unless they were put on one side only and placed in glass, etc. But essentially, he has lots of foghorns like on the outside of the buildings and staircases, lifts, heating, venting, air conditioning. They're all exterior. And again, that's a classic example of his one. So you've got Terry Farrell, postmodern, then you've got Richard Rogers, the Bowerism as well. Then next to that, his former colleague and then later in life rival, Norman Foster, has a building as well. And that one, number 88, Wood Street, I think it is. So Foster, amongst other things, did the very famous the Swiss rebuilding, or the Gherkin in London, which called the erotic Gherkin, as it's called, curved like a winning lots of awards. And it's next door to his former friend and then rival, Richard Rogers, and it couldn't be more different. So when one's again sort of exteriors, and this one it's bent at the top, it's curved at the front roof, so it's actually an echo back to the Gherkin itself. And at the back of it, it's turned inside out. It's got a huge concave hole in it that goes like this to encompass a tree that's in the middle of the courtyard at the back of it as well. Again, it's like two buildings in one. You can walk through, and what they've done is there's a tiny gap between the two buildings where they don't touch, but they're just looking at each other. So you can see that from the side as well. What I love most about that is that I talk about the Wood Street, and there's a church in the middle of the street. So you got modern architects, Foster, Rogers, Farrell, and then you've got a Christopher Wren church right next to them as well, post-fire. Sadly, it's a church that was destroyed, and all that's left of it is the tower now. So it's no longer a church. The tower is actually an office, very narrow and high, and I think it's financial services support team. They've been working there. Well, it was a private residence for a while as well, and it's a Gothic 17th century spire tower. So you've got these hugely contrasting examples of three different types of modern architects, plus a Christopher Wren building, literally within a few yards of each other in this street, tiny little back alley in the middle of the city of London. So that's another one of my favorite architectural places to take people to.
Wonderful. I love the contrast that you can get in a city that's as old as London. It Halifax, Nova Scotia, where I'm from, we have a little bit of that. In that we have the first structures which were built in the late 1400s, and then mostly the fort comes in shortly after, and then all of the streets are very narrow, tiny streets. A lot of the historic buildings have been replaced because Halifax explosion just wiped out everything downtown.
Right.
And the equivalent of the first nuclear bomb went off in the harbor and leveled the city. My friend's grandfather was born in the Commons during that the recovery of that, because well, the explosion caused his mother to go into labor.
My God,
And
I knew nothing about this. I don't want to, take away from, So I assume a lot of your guests will know about this. So just briefly, what was it about? What caused it?
two ships. One was carrying fuel, the other one was carrying TNT, uh, and neither one of them wanted to get out of each other's way, and they collided. And the one with TNT on it caught fire, and both of them exploded when it hit the TNT, and it was like 100,000 tons of TNT, and it obliterated everything. There it welded images of people in the downtown into the side of buildings, and they
Mhm.
still have those dark marks. Basically, silhouettes of people were basically etched into buildings.
That sounds like Hiroshima and Nagasaki, or
Yeah,
and it reminds me also there was something. I think there was a fertilizer tank that blew up in Syria. I think it was,
yeah,
or was it in about a year and a half ago? Sort of sounds very
yeah.
similar as well.
Same
Oh
sort of
God.
situation. Just horrible to think of, but it's a lasting image
Hmm.
in Halifax. We also have the Titanic uh, graveyard in downtown
Really
Halifax. Yeah.
unbelievable. Oh, I'm sorry, I'm eating again. Look, oh God, that's absolutely shocking. Well, everyone's got history, but you make me want to come and visit. So,
Yeah, there you go. It's there's a lot down in downtown Halifax. Um, Victoria, it's a newer city, but it's got some character to it.
yeah.
A lot of recent history, the rum running and the Shanghai uh, areas, the Chinatown, Fantan Alley,
Hmm.
the smallest alley of anywhere in Canada. It's literally less than 2 meters wide. And when I first moved here, they still had all the old lantern, uh, paper lantern type things up. Now it's been remodeled now, and it has more modern type lighting,
Yeah,
but it's still it's cobblestone, and you can feel the age in it when you're walking through. Wonderful.
fantastic. Excellent. Well, I'm planning some holidays soon. I'm going to Turkey for 10 days to stay with a really old university friend of mine, going to Istanbul, Constantinople,
Uh,
Byzantium. I'm so excited about that. Just incredible history there as well. But yeah, I just love it. I'm just so glad I've got the chance to do these things now.
it's nice to have the opportunity to travel
Mm.
and see some of these beautiful cities.
And what I've also learned now, having become a tour guide myself, um, in the past, I was very much an independent traveler. I go somewhere, I get the guidebook, and I'd be walking around the streets with my nose in it, ignoring what was around me, trying to find the things that were listed in there, and basically cheating myself of the real
Real.
experience. So now I still do that, unfortunately, but I also use local guides, and I'll, you know, seek out a guided experience anywhere I go. And yeah, it's I recommend anybody, if you're going anywhere, find a good guide. That's what I say.
Yes. The Onion Garden. Can you tell us a little bit
Oh,
about
yes. So this is extraordinary man called Jens, Jens, who is I think he's Swedish. He is a gardener by profession, and he has contacts because he lives and works in Westminster and the heart of power. So he works on behalf of some fairly senior politicians doing their gardening. He's got lots of contacts there as well. So Westminster City Council which have just changed their politics, by the way. They used to be very hardcore conservative council. So there were scandals associated with them gerrymandering some land in the 80s, etc. But they've just for the first time been won over by the opposition Labour Party. And I think they're attempting to green the space in many ways. They've discovered that there are certain tracts of land in central Westminster which are unused. And they found a little sliver, like an alleyway in the back of a very large new complex, just off of a place called Victoria Street. But near the House of Commons, near the House of Parliament, and it was empty. And it was right above railway tracks. So you could hear feel the vibrations there, the underground tracks going right underneath it as well. It was empty. So they offered him the free use of this area to populate. And he started filling it. He couldn't dig there. That's the one thing. So any plants that were brought in needed to be put into pots or earthers or above soil level. They couldn't dig into the ground. But he's filled it with trees, with plants, with bushes, with shrubs. All of them are sustainable. You've got bird nests there as well, and animal hotels, and all sorts of incredible. And he's got huge onions. He's obsessed with onions. So he's got massive onions growing everywhere, or baskets of onions going down. And he was also he's quite a witty man. So he's got these little quotes that he's placed in little pots or little signs throughout the garden that you can walk upon. And it's like a maze, a labyrinth. You walk through it. And he's just opened up at the back of it a few weeks ago a new area that he was closed before, about the size of a tennis court, maybe, but cut in half and made long. And in it, he got a little cafe in there as well, lots of seating, and many more shrubs and plants and pots and trees. And it's an oasis. So you're in the middle of one of the busiest sections of London, hugely polluted, noise, etc., etc. And you walk around the corner behind this new building, and suddenly there's this tiny garden there, and he's nearly always there as well. And it's free to get in. People go there to have their lunches, got their sandwiches out, and just have a relaxing time. And he's inspired by doing good. Really, he's trying to put things back into the community, and I don't think he makes any money from it. I think it's like a free service he's offering because he's got some fairly well-off clients that give him money to live on. But it's a work of labor of love, and he has made it unique and special. And I've got my big 60th birthday this year, and I've been thinking about a place to have it at. And I was seriously considering hiring his garden for it. But then we discussed it with my wife, and we realized my birthday's in May, but there's still no guarantee it's not going to rain heavily on the day. And I just couldn't risk such a big birthday being spoiled by having it outside, and there's no cover there either, so we couldn't have moved it indoors. So unfortunately, I'm not going to do it there. I've had another venue now, but that would have been such a lovely place to have a summer garden party.
Yeah.
It's so dreamlike. It reminds me of something like Alice in Wonderland. You're suddenly transported back, and even the little signs that he's got all over the place. So a bit like Lewis Carroll, eat me, drink me, that sort of thing. It's a real stunning achievement, a real labor of love, and it's heartwarming and it's life affirming. It's the sort of thing that really gives you confidence in humanity's powers of rejuvenation and working with nature and rewilding and generally escaping from everyday modern life. So that's the onion garden for you.
That's awesome.
It is. I'm so lucky to find it. I couldn't believe that I'd stumbled across it. And I've been trying to promote it on social media again. And yeah, and he's very happy for me to help him.
Well, it's important to have natural spaces in cities.
Mm.
The Victoria, where we live, is called the Garden City
Mhm.
because of that. Uh, I'm forgetting his name. There's a very famous Japanese gardener who did a lot of work in the city. Butchart Gardens is kind of a family built it, but they have some of his influence there. And but my wife and I do random Nautica,
Mm-hmm.
and if we don't put in an intention, we'll end up in some small garden somewhere that if you didn't know it was there, you wouldn't find it.
I love that sort of thing. Well,
And
that's also in the city of London. Very similar things happen. You've got the a lot of the small churches, and there were like 32 of them in the city of London, in this tiny area, have got their own churchyards, but they're often at the back of the buildings. You don't know they're there. You can't reach them through the street. You have to go through the church to get them. And they're wonderful. Okay, this is Jens, by the way, the guy who does the garden. Jens Jakobsen is his name. Really lovely guy, and yeah, he's just an exceptional yeah, he's Danish, not Swedish. That's right. I've just checked on his website. So yeah, you can go into these lovely churches, and suddenly at the back of them there's a pocket, like a handkerchief pocket size oasis of calm. And the City of London, in particular, are very keen on promoting these gardens for use. And there's a couple of churches that were destroyed in the Second World War, which instead of rebuilding the church, they just converted it into a garden. So the walls are still standing, but it's open in the centre. You just sit down there. It's called St. Dunstan in the East, the most famous one, which incidentally was made into a film set in the 1960s for the remake of a classic horror film. The original film was based on a book by a man called John Wyndham called The Chrysalids, I think it was, or Village of the Damned. The film was called Village of the Damned, and then the remake was called Children of the Damned. And basically these aliens have inseminated women, and the babies that are born are all aliens, and they all have psychic powers, and they can stare at you and drive you insane and make you smash your car into a wall and kill yourself. Anyway, they're in fact in the second film they use this church as their final stand. So they're inside the church tower, and all the armies have gathered around with their guns and their tanks to destroy them. And in fact, it turns out they're actually peace emissaries who are attempting to bring prosperity and freedom to the world, I think, but they all get killed in the end. Humans don't accept them, and so they destroyed. But that was the church that was used, another pocket handkerchief space. And one of my favorite gardens in the city of London, it's called Postman's Park. And again, it's another church. St. Botolph's Aldgate is the church. The garden is nice, but there's a corner of the garden which has got this absolutely incredible memorial in it. So Postman's Park, and it was designed because the local post office was next door, and the postal staff would come to this garden to have their lunch. But this artist whose name forgets me, I'll look him up in a bit. He decided to create almost like a shrine in one side of his garden, but it was like sheltered, and he made these beautiful plaques that were fired in a local potters, which were full of stories. So each of the plaques, there's about 80 of them there, are named after someone who died saving other people. So the whole thing was called the Memorial to Heroic Self-Sacrifice. And each of them has a story associated, written on the tablets, that gives you an explanation as to what happened. So, for example, I've got one here. I hope I can read it to you. So it says, died 1899 in a boiler explosion at a Battersea sugar refinery, was fatally scalded in returning to search for his mate. Can you read that?
yeah.
And each of these plaques on there, it's a tiny little section of the garden. You would never notice it was there. Okay, right, this one here, Mary Rogers, stewardess of the Stella, a ship, and she gave her lifebelt up to someone else so they could escape the ship, and she was drowned. So, and there's about 80 of them here, and some of them incredibly sad. And this is a police constable who died here. Tried to save a child from a runaway horse. That one there. Yeah, so they're all some. Obviously, Victorians were into sentimentality, and a lot of these are about children saving other children, or yeah, etc. Oh, look at this one, Alice Ayres. Right, and she saved 3 children from a burning house. at the cost of her own life. Now, what the interesting thing about this is that there is a playwright called Patrick Marber who is a genius, and he's written all sorts of comedy stuff about. He worked with Alan Partridge. You ever seen Alan Partridge?
Yeah.
Right, he was the joint creator of the concept. He wrote the first series jointly with him, and he appears in many of the episodes. But he's actually a very serious playwright as well. And he writes a play that starts off in that very park next to that plaque. And because he used to live around the corner from there, so he was walking his dog one day, he stumbled across the park and he saw the plaques there, and he thought, okay, let's get this idea. And so he takes the name of that woman, Alice Ayres, and he bases the whole film that was made into an amazing film, which stars, oh God, what's now? I'm going to read out the names of the characters in the film. Yeah, it stars Jude Law, Julia Roberts, Natalie Portman, and Clive Owen. And in it, they take the name Alice Ayres, and the woman is in the park. She meets this man, and she pretends that her name is Alice Ayres. And then it all starts from there, and it unravels, and it's all about sexual obsession and lies and betrayal, etc. But literally, it was inspired by seeing that one name on that plaque in the park that created his genius, ideas. That was given Oscar nominations, that film as well. So yeah, it's ironic. There's the tiny little park in the city of London. One plaque in the park, it became the inspiration for this incredible film that was Oscar nominated.
It's amazing how a little thing like that is well, inspiration. And inspiration can happen anywhere.
Mm.
So it's having these hidden gems in places is great. Can you tell us a little bit about the first coffee house of London?
Yeah. Okay. So I've got something here to show you, I think. Or maybe not. Okay. Coffee is an extremely addictive substance, as I think you know.
Hmm.
It was first discovered. Okay, I've got it here. First discovered. The story goes that it was first discovered in Yemen by a goat herd who noticed that his flock, some of the naughtier goats in his flock, were not going to sleep at night. They were jumping around, dancing, and generally making a nuisance of themselves. And he couldn't understand why they didn't go to sleep like the rest of his herd. So he followed them around the corner, and he saw they were nibbling the red berries of a little bush that was there. Coffee, and they then industrialized the production process, roasted, etc., etc. But it's all down to that goat herd noticing his flock jumping around at night. And the first coffee houses, we believe, were in ancient Constantinople in the 1550s, I think. But I'm sure that people will correct me if they hear this. And then it eventually spread outside. The first place really for it to come to in Europe, outside of Turkey, was Britain, was England, was London in 1652. Now, there are other claims. Oxford claims that they had the first coffee house in the United Kingdom in 1650. But the person who I believe in this, an expert, claims it was not true, and in fact it was London in 1652. There was a man called Pasquale Rosé, who was the servant. Pasquale Rosé, we believe, came from modern day Smyrna, we think, on the Mediterranean coast, who was the servant of this trader, Lloyd, I think his name was. And this trader had been having coffee in his own house and sharing it with his friends. But for the first time, he gave money to Pasquale Rosé to set up a little shack by the side of a churchyard called St. Michael Cornhill. And all it was a wooden board with like a little shutter that came up and down on it, and that was it. And he would make the coffee there, and people would because it's addictive. And I don't actually drink coffee myself. I'm a tea drinker because my parents were tea planters in Sri Lanka. Because it's addictive, people found themselves drawn to come back every morning to get their cup of coffee. And within 10 years, there were 100 coffee houses just in the city of London alone. By the end of the century, 50 years onwards, there were over 1,000 coffee houses in London. And they became known as penny universities because they invented the concept of a bottomless cup, whereby you spent a penny and you'd have all day long, they would continue to pour out from these ewers, this piping hot, dark concoction. And it was given the nickname of Hogo Irreverence. Hogo, Hogo, was a corruption of the French words "eau," high, goût, taste, high tasting or exquisite, that sort of, and then irreverence, which was slang for human excrement. So it was high tasting shit. Sorry for the language there. You can blurt that out if you want to. But people couldn't stop drinking it. And it wasn't given any milk back then, but it was such a hit. And if you think about the era, 1652 was right in the middle of the Puritan Revolution in this country, because in 1649, the Puritans had finally prevailed over King Charles I, and he'd been executed. And that new government, maybe characterized, but certainly they didn't enjoy people getting drunk, and they banned Christmas, it's alleged, for example. So having a coffee house in which people could not get drunk, unlike taverns or inns, but instead be encouraged to have conversations. And again, remember, this was a period of relatively free thought. Having toppled the monarchy, anything was up for grabs. And you had all sorts of religious beliefs being openly espoused without fear of being executed for the first time. And radical sects like the Diggers, the Levelers, the Fifth Monarchists, the Anabaptists, the Quakers, all sorts of varieties of religious experience were being espoused. So having a coffee house culture in which you could discuss these things, in whose tables each day the latest pamphlets and broadsides and earliest forms of newspapers would be laid out for anyone to read and share, meant they became incredibly popular. And again, I have here, because I like to collect rare things, this is an example of the sort of thing that would have been put into a coffee house. So at the top it says, Mercurius Publicus, comprising the sum of all affairs now in agitation in England, Scotland, and Ireland, together with foreign intelligence, for information of the people and to prevent false news. Now, isn't that interesting? The concept of false news, or how can I put it, alternative facts? Might know where that comes from. This was even back then. And again, further down the page, you got printed by authority. You read that? Published by authority. So this was the government's official propaganda, you might say, of how they wanted to present news. And again, look at the date here. This is 1662. This was printed. And so this is after the Restoration. This is when King Charles was back. And so he was a lot less excited about the idea that people could discuss things freely in coffee houses. And in fact, he attempted to ban them. Coffee houses were not democratic in the sense that women were not allowed in them. Only men were allowed. And they led to the creation of diversification as well. So particularly in the city of London, people of shared interest would gather in a specific coffee house that would get a reputation for that particular trade or business. And so it was in coffee houses that, for example, the stock market started. Lloyd's coffee house, Edward Lloyd's coffee house. It's also where specific commodities were traded, like the Jamaica coffee house would trade in sugar, in slaves. We have to acknowledge this. It's also where the insurance sector took off because, particularly after the Great Fire of London in 1666, there was a need, and also because the slave trade required shipping to be insured, given that the Middle Passage in particular was where a lot of ships foundered or where slaves were thrown overboard, like in the case of the Zong. They needed to insure them. So again, all these specialist financial diversification of commodities, of markets, of requirements sprung up, and the city catered to them through the coffee houses. But Charles, on his restoration in 1660, he didn't like this free thinking. And example here, this is all about the first page here, is all about the apprehension of a group of, as I said here, wicked varlets who were accused of plotting against the monarchy. And on the third page here, you've got a list of their allegiances, and it says that, again, I mentioned this before, they were fifth monarchists rather, Anabaptists, and fighting Quakers, which to us is a complete contradiction in terms, as Quakers are pacifists. But obviously then they had either falsely accused of being fighting, or there were maybe a sect within them that weren't pacifists, I'm not sure. But he was very, very nervous about rebellions. There'd been the fifth monarchists had rebelled the year before, 1661, in Wood Street, same street we talked about before in London. They were put down by what became the Coldstream Guards, which is the only reason those guards were saved following the Restoration, as they were in fact founded as a parliamentarian regiment. So that's anyway. He decided to try and ban coffee houses, Charles II, on his Restoration, and he really didn't want discussion, but he dressed up the justification as being forced upon him because the wives of all the traders who were spending all their time in the coffee houses complained to him for two reasons. One, being in the coffee house gossiping all day long was making their men effeminate, turning them into women. And secondly, the coffee drink was affecting their performance in the bedroom as well, is what he claimed. But it was his edict to ban coffee houses was widely ignored. I think it generated tax revenue anyway. So, but that was evidencing his suspicion of free thought and of people's likelihood of challenging authority if left to their own devices, you know. But this, what I've got here, is a pamphlet. You can see at the bottom it says, published by Pasquale Rosi at the sign of his own head. This is the man who founded the very first coffee house. And throughout this document, it details all the alleged benefits of the coffee drink. And yeah, nowadays we have the Trade Description Act, which forces you to accurately describe any type of medical benefits of anything you sell. But here he had free reign to claim all sorts of very dubious benefits to it, including it can lift the orifice of the stomach, fortifies the heat, helps digestion, great use in the morning for an afternoon. It quickens the spirits, makes the heart lighten, good against sore eyes, and it's better if you hold your head over it and take in the steam that way. It suppresses fumes exceedingly, good against headache, stops defluxion of rheums, and distills upon the head and prevents consumption and the cough of the lungs. It's excellent to prevent and cure dropsy, gout, and scurvy. It is better for children that have running humors, such as the king's evil. It prevents miscarrying in childbearing women. And it's most importantly, it says it prevents remedy against hypochondriac wind. So, so if you're suffering from excess wind, take some coffee and it will cure you immediately. So this is an example of the sort of false advertising that coffee houses gave at the time as well. And if you go to St. Michael Cornhill, just off of Cornhill in the city of London, there's the Jamaican coffee house at the back of it, which now the Jamaica Wine House. It's been rebuilt as a late Victorian building. But there's a plaque on the wall of the coffee house that says, "This is the site of the first coffee house in London by Pasquale Rosi in 1652. So that's that. The other thing about coffee houses is in London City, the financial district, they were associated with money and with commodities, insurance, stock exchange, etc. But in the west side of the city, which is where the wealthier people lived, it became associated with gambling, with literature. And so there were also varieties. You didn't have just have coffee houses, you also had chocolate houses as well. And they were a little bit more expensive, the chocolate houses. In fact, one of the most famous one was called Brown's, founded in 1690s in St James's area of London. Brown's is now probably the most exclusive of all the gentlemen's clubs in Mayfair, that area of London, in St James. It's men only. And it's a sort of place where if you're a member of the House of Lords, that's the equivalent of your local pub. You go there to meet your peers, literally, in many ways. It's still a gambling den, and it's also the basis, along with another club called Boodles, for the clubs that feature in the James Bond novel Moonraker. So in Moonraker, the club's called Blades, and it's where Bond's boss says, "Oh, I've got a private matter for you, James. Can you come and check out this man who's joined us recently, immensely wealthy financier called Sir Hugo Drax, but we think he's cheating at cards, the ultimate sin amongst aristocratic circles." And Bond obviously exposes him, etc. But that's another example of one of the early clubs, coffee house in that case, that then went on to become very famous in its later life. But in Covent Garden area, you had Button's Coffee House, and they were famous for literature. Poets would declaim their Dryden and Pope, and people like that would have their admiring fans desperate for the latest verses to fall from their lips. And you also had early forms of journalism there as well. Magazines like The Tatler and The Spectator were founded there by Joseph Addison, for example. And you would hand in your articles for them. There's a little sculpture, I think it was a bull's head or something, that you'd put them in and you'd written them and they would be published the next day or something. So a lot of, and the Spectator is still published nowadays, a bit modified, but it's still got that concept of journalism being embedded within coffee house culture as well. So yeah, coffee houses were immensely important. We wouldn't have the modern day city of London with its diversification of financial instruments as we do now without the coffee house inspirations. And again, lots of modern journalism, magazines, and newsletters would or be difficult to imagine life without them.
True, it's true. Here it's Starbucks has taken over everywhere. But we have a few chocolate houses. So
Right.
uh, Rocky Mountain Chocolate. They've been around for just over 100 years, and artisanal chocolate makers.
Mm.
There's this one little shop on Fort Street you go to, and he brings you out a hot cup of cocoa, and it's all done in house, and he has uh different kinds of chocolate. He was, when we went there last, he was showcasing rose chocolate, which is a new chocolate plant that they've found. Has no caffeine in it at all, and it tastes kind of um like a fruity sweet flavor by
Mm.
itself. Like even the dark chocolate has that sweet fruity flavor to it, and it's a
That's
new,
unbelievable.
yeah. And
Well, what I say is that in originally coffee was there because of coffee. Coffee was the thing that bound them together.
yeah,
But come the 90s, when the new variety of coffee explosions took place with the Starbucks, etc. By the way, I lived in Seattle in 1982 to 3, and I think I saw the very first Starbucks then.
yeah,
It was in the mall,
yeah,
selling just a one-off branch. I bought tea from them at that time because they sold tea as well. But yeah, nowadays I think the reason people flock to coffee houses isn't so much for the coffee, but it's the new commodity that they're selling is Wi-Fi, and,
yeah,
it's the that's the equivalent to the penny university. You got this, and I also, to a certain extent, co-working as well. Coffee houses becoming, again, that's what they were originally. The first coffee houses were the first type of co-working,
yeah.
whereby you'd have certain people and they'd cross-pollinate ideas, and you'd find business contacts and you know people willing to buy your products or whatever. So nothing changes really.
No, it
Coffee
doesn't.
is the lubricant.
Yep. Uh, can you tell us a little bit about what mudlarking is, and is
Mhm.
there a way a person could do it in a tour in London?
Yeah. So the word mudlark comes from um, amongst the poorest of all Victorian people. So if you were a mudlark in, say, Dickensian times, you would literally spend your day waiting for the tide to go in, and then you'd wade out, often barefoot, semi-naked, really, into the horrifically polluted, stinking waters of the River Thames, searching for anything that might be salvageable. So it was, I mean, obviously, all the most human excrement flowed out into the Thames at that point as well. So you'd be literally going through the motions, as it were.
Yep.
And you would just be looking for anything, metal, occasionally a bit of money, pottery, anything that you might have a chance to sell. And then you'd come back and hand it to your parents or whatever. And it was actually children who did it as well. And it was just one of the worst possible jobs you can have. So that's where the word originated. But nowadays it means it's more of a social pastime for Londoners, whereby certain parts of the River Thames, um, very carefully controlled and restricted, uh, you can go and search things there. And the riverbank obviously renews every time a tide goes up because it's so fast. It's a constant reopening of gaps, and things are deposited back there, and erosions mean the new things are exposed, etc. So it's constantly renewing. And given that London's been inhabited with, for millennia, I mean, the Romans first came in 43 AD, and people have been chucking things into the river ever since. And also, given that the River Thames is now about half the width that it was back in Roman times as well, it's been built on and it's been constricted now. So there's a lot less space to hold all these objects than there used to be as well. The If you apply, you apply to something called the Port of London Authority, and they used to give you a license to allow you to search the Thames. So, and I've got a little tide app on my phone that tells me when the next high tide and the next low tide are going to be. Um, and so if you can plan ahead and know when to go out there. You just go, well, I cycle down to the Thames. I normally put on walking boots, and I'm little gloves, like nitrile gloves,
Yep.
to latex gloves to protect you, and you've got a little pouch that you wear. Some people put on little knee pads too, so they can kneel down, and you basically just um, scour the waterside. And depending on where you are, there are certain ways you're allowed to dig, well, or dig at all. So some places you can just observe. You're not allowed to actually disturb the surface. Other places you're allowed to do a little bit of movement, scratch stuff away. And other places, if you've got an extra special license, which I don't have because it's very, very restricted, you're allowed to dig. I think it's up to 3 inches into the ground. And again, and there are some places where it's absolutely forbidden to dig or do any type of searching at all. Most famously at a place called Queen Hithe, which is quite near Cannon Street Station, a bit further along, and it's a wharf that goes up, and that's just teeming with treasure. So no one's allowed to dig there. They found all sorts of cutlery there, coins. Yeah, it's an amazing place. But it's a, and because during lockdown it became a very popular uh, hobby, and so many people applied to do it, they actually shut off all new applications to it. So you can't become one nowadays unless you've already got a license. But luckily, I had applied for a license before lockdown started, and therefore they allow, if you have an existing license, you are allowed to apply for a new one when yours expires. And mine expired last week. So 3 years, it's £100 for 3 years, or just over now. It's gone up a bit, but it gives you incredible objects to find. I've got some examples of things I found here. I haven't done it very much recently, but this, for example, is an example of a Roman roof tile. And Roman roof tiles came in two distinct shapes. So one was called an imbrex and one was called a tegula. Now, I don't remember which is which, but basically this is a lip in which the other type would come over with like a curve and slot into this hinge here, this gap here, and it would then tightly adhere and hold it, and it would become waterproof. And it was a roof tile from a Roman house. So I've got another example here, much bigger one I found around the same time as well. You can see the design here too. And so that's just the two things I found out. I've got some more stuff in my bedroom upstairs. One of the most common things you find are little broken clay pipes, because smoking was brought into this country in the 1580s by a man called Sir Walter Raleigh, famous explorer. He also brought back potatoes as well. So the two staples of the British working class, potatoes and cigarettes, both down to him. And it'd be obviously much like coffee. It's another incredibly addictive and yet harmful product. And people would use these clay pipes, very long, thin clay pipes with maybe sometimes a modelled bowl at the end. Most of them plain, however, and they would break very easily, and you just chuck them into the Thames. And that's why you still find enormous. Here we are. I've got one here. There's a bit of clay pipe here. Can you see that?
Yeah.
And then that's it. So someone would have been smoking this however many hundred years ago, and just thrown it in the river when it broke. So, and they're so common in the Thames. You find them everywhere. So, and I wonder often what would be the equivalent in the future if people were to dig up our remains and find something else. They wouldn't find many examples of cigarettes because they'd all just be decomposed and gone. But I'm not sure if you have the same issue here, where you are rather, but a few years ago in London, people started taking nitrous oxide. It became a very, very popular drug for party goers, and they would often be in the form of little silver goblet size, like ampules, the pressurized containers that you would, and they would be originally created for using ice creams. I think it was whipping, but they became, you put them into a balloon and you snort them, allegedly. I have to say, I've never used them myself. But they used to be scattered all about the streets of London, especially after a party or a festival. You'd find them everywhere. So I think those are our equivalent for the future to the clay pipes of the 19th century and earlier as well. So that's an example of the sort of thing that you can get mudlarking. And if you find something really, really important and valuable as well, then you also have to report it. So a friend of mine who is also a mudlarker, he had an extraordinary find recently. I won't go into his name or anything like that, but he had to report this to the Museum of London when he found it, because he found a section of human skull. And yes, and it had been cut up. So it was like, and it had holes in it at the back as well. And they worked out, he believes, that it was actually a medical skeleton that was in use in some doctor's surgery or as a training aid. And it had been articulated and it was hinged so you could open it up. And that's why it been cut into like a flap, and it had these two twin holes at the back as well. So so he had to take that to the Museum of London, and they had to, do a very normally if you bring an object that's potentially valuable or important to the museum, then it's about a year's wait before they get around to actually looking at it and giving you any information about it. But in his case, because it was a human remain, they were right to the top of the queue.
Yeah.
And so that's the sort of thing you can find. But if anyone wants to come with, then they can watch me do it. But I'm not allowed to actually let them do any mudlarking themselves. But I'd be very happy to do that with people. I've got to finish in a minute, I have to say, but I've got one more thing it's downstairs. So if you want to give me a 30 seconds to show you, this is another lovely bit of glass that I found. Hold on. Okay, Alan. So the final thing before I go, and I'm hoping the light works for this. I'm going to hold this up to it. Is this? If you can see that at all?
Yeah.
It's a glass bottle or a side of part of it.
Yeah.
And there's this amazing image in it of a a leaf, like a maple leaf, actually,
Yeah.
almost.
Yeah.
Actually, you can see it like that.
Yeah.
And there's a date on it as well. It says 1872 here. Yeah,
Yeah.
there we
1872.
go. Yeah, and I looked it up, and it's a type of medical bottle. So I just love the detail on it as well. But the thing is, it's not particularly valuable, but that's not the point for me. It's all about finding things that connect you to the past and
Yeah.
give you a sense of understanding what other people were creating and doing at the time. And yeah, so sort of thing you found, that was on the first day I went searching. That's what I found.
I want to say thank you to David for his enthusiasm for the work he does and the show and tell, which was fascinating. The deeply personal touches David provides, simply by his eye for detail, are breathtaking and essential to keeping the history of London alive. I'm a fan of his work and the tours he does, and hope his trip to Istanbul was as fun as talking to him was for me. Please check him out on TikTok, and if you are in London, definitely book a tour. You'll see things that most people who live in London never know about. Please follow, like, and subscribe on whatever platform you listen to us on. We are now on iHeartRadio and 10 other platforms. This content is made free by Parasortium.com. So please donate or buy a plan. It helps us continue to create more and better content like this. Parasortium is a consortium of content creators, a safe place to learn and create. Until the next time, take care.